You probably remember a guy named Tony Soprano. Even if you never watched the television show, you probably are familiar with the concept. Tony Soprano, 100% Italian. He only ate Italian food. All his friends were Italian. He spoke English in Italian. He used Italian slang and phrases as often as we say "Oy vey" and "Sei gesund." He had no tolerance for his children dating non-Italians. He really didn't feel comfortable in settings not saturated completely in Italian culture. There was once an extraordinary episode in which, in order to do business with some associates in Italy, Tony and some of his colleagues took a trip to Italy. His excitement to go to the motherland was palpable. But when he gets there, he is decidedly and ironically uncomfortable. He realizes that his Italian, which is one of his trademarks, is terrible. The Italian food tastes different. The women there do not understand his charm. He has trouble doing business with Italians who do business differently than he does. And the trip ends with Tony returning home to New Jersey, both disillusioned and unfulfilled. The ultimate Italian returns from Italy, realizing he doesn't identify with Italy. He's not Italian. He's Italian-American. And that's a whole different thing. I think of this story when I'm in Israel, and I think about the differences between their Jewish culture and ours. The language is different. The food and culture are different. The connection that Jews in Israel have to their Jewish identities is much, much different. The first two aren't such an issue. Everyone there practically speaks English, and their falafel is way better. But what is truly stunning is the difference between the Judaism of a Jewish homeland and the Judaism that we and our ancestors have created in this new world. From the very beginning of the Jewish experience here in the United States, there were Jews who believed that Judaism here was unlike anywhere else our people had ever been in the diaspora. And because of the freedoms afforded to them, not only to worship as they chose, but to take part in the mainstream culture of society, a group of Jews for the first time was willing to declare that Jewish salvation could be found in a place other than the land of Israel. When the Jews of Charleston, South Carolina, dedicated their beautiful temple on Hassel Street in the picturesque downtown city center, the rabbi there at the time declared that this synagogue is our temple, this city is our Jerusalem, and this happy land is our Palestine. It wasn't until the rise of Hitler in Europe that the Reform movement professed support for a Jewish homeland in Palestine. And even then, those early reformers believed that a Jewish state was needed for Jews in danger in Europe, not for the Jews here. Here we're thriving. Here we're doing well. What was going on here was something completely different. And for the Jews who emigrated here from places like South America and then later Europe, beginning here was not so easy. It took generations to learn the language, to develop applicable skills, to get educated, to build communities, to deal with anti-Semitism, and to make this place a home. But the product of their investment is one of the proudest, most successful, highly educated, and motivated Jewish communities the world has ever known. Today we live here in freedom, and we owe it to those Jews who came before us. But we also inherited from them a community that was so eager to assimilate that it left behind a great deal of its heritage. And that heritage and its inherent value must be reclaimed if we today are going to stave off the tidal wave of assimilation that so frequently haunts Jews who live in freedom. This isn't the first time that we found ourselves in such a situation where things are so good that we take for granted the gifts of Judaism. If we look back at Jewish history, there have really been two very distinct Jewish stages that each of us should internalize and try to understand. The first stage began at Mount Sinai, when the Jews became a free people, protected by God. And it lasted until 586 BCE, until the first Holy Temple was destroyed. This was our first stage, Sinai until the destruction of the temple. The second stage was the destruction of the temple until today. If we can understand those two stages, we can figure out a lot about what's going on with Judaism throughout its history and today. When the Jewish people first tasted freedom after the Exodus from Egypt, and they arrived at Mount Sinai, at their very first sight of adversity, they turned away from Moses and built the golden calf. Their first foray into idolatry as a nation. This experience was the beginning of a period in which I called this first stage, where Jews would struggle with the temptation of idol worship. The chapters of the Torah are obsessed with warning us of the dangers of idol worship. You don't see too many Jews today worshiping idols. Not too many Jews are thinking, I can't wait to get out of here because I'm going to have a real spiritual experience when I get home. I just bought a cool new idol. But this used to be the case. That's what Jews used to do. From Mount Sinai to the destruction of the first temple, 1,000 years later, our ancestors continually and repeatedly turned to idols. They forsook Torah and the Jewish traditions. They sought to engage in cultic practices of their neighbors. And the Talmud teaches us that this is ultimately why God permitted the first temple to be destroyed by the Babylonians. This was the first time in nearly a millennia after the temple was destroyed that the Jews lost their freedom and were completely at the mercy of cruel foreign powers. Thus begins stage 2. No longer do we have freedom. From this point forward until 1948, and you could argue even till today, the Jews have been at the mercy of other nations or as vassal states. But what happened? As stage 2 began, the end of idolatry began. Amazingly, the Talmud teaches that after the first temple was destroyed, the Jews completely stopped worshiping idols. After centuries of freedom that came with it idol obsession, now came persecution. But with persecution became a return and commitment to Jewish tradition. Think about the two holidays that happened after the first temple was destroyed. Think about Purim. In the Purim story, Haman, what was the moment that Haman said, I'm going to destroy all of the Jews? When Mordecai came before him, Haman ordered him to bow down before him. And Mordecai refused to bow down, saying, we're the Jews. We're the people who don't bow down to idols. It's ironic, because they used to be, and they were for a long time. Then comes Hanukkah, and another evil nation comes and takes over the Holy Temple and places all of their idols in the temple, and the Jewish people wage war for the sake of removing and rededicating. Removing the idols, rededicating the temple, and standing up to the temptations of idolatry. In stage 1, from the birth of the Jewish people at Mount Sinai to the destruction of the first temple, we were free, we were sovereign, we were protected by God, and we were masters of our own fate. Along with that freedom came addiction to idolatry. But then stage 2, the period of the Babylonian Captivity, all the way to the birth of the modern state of Israel, when we have been at the mercy of others and under the sovereignty of non-Jewish rulers and nations and starved for freedom and safety, we turned away from idols. In this period of fragility and insecurity, that reliance was gone. Instead, time and time again, our ancestors have been willing to give their lives rather than convert. They've held true to the wisdom of Torah. They didn't let go of their heritage. They kept their customs, and they continued to bind each other one generation to the next. But in stage 2, along with giving up idolatry, we have been searching for a place where we could be both proud Jews and accepted by the society where we lived. I was struck several years ago when visiting the Jewish cemetery in Berlin. How many valiant Jews who served valiantly for Germany and gave their lives for their country in World War I. Those Jews wanted to keep their Jewish heritage, but still fit seamlessly into German society. In his book, The Pity of It All, an Israeli writer named Amos Elon portrays how a small group of poor Jewish immigrants in Germany grew into a powerful group of scientists, thinkers, philosophers, and businessmen who thought that Germany would become a wondrous homeland for the Jewish people. Those Jews in Germany thought that they had found a place where Jews could live in freedom, maintain their Jewish identity, and be accepted into the greater society. We know all too well that Germany was not a land that could tolerate such a reality. But as many European Jews discovered from 1880 to 1920, there was one other country in the West that would open its doors to them and would give them a chance to be Jews and to be free and to be successful. And as this realization became clear, they came in masses. They were greeted by the Statue of Liberty on their journey to a new chance at freedom. In America, we found an unusual opportunity, a place that would let us be proud Jews and proud Americans. And despite bumps and bruises along the way, it has worked. Jews have had a monumental impact on the United States. We have flourished here. We have achieved here. We've been welcomed and recognized here. We've done everything in our power to be accepted here. But that acceptance has come at a price. Let us be clear and genuine. Just as Jews have had a great impact on America, America has had a major impact on our Judaism. The famous Pew survey of American Judaism that came out a few years ago put down on paper what we are seeing as facts on the ground. The largest growing groups of Jews in this country is a category now known as Jews of no religion. Nearly 1 in 5 American Jews associates with this term. It means that they were raised Jewish, they have at least one Jewish parent, they identify as a Jew, but have no interest in pursuing the Jewish religion or affiliating with Jewish institutions. And while a good 60% of American Jews do identify in some way with either Reform, Conservative, or Orthodox Judaism, more than half of American Jews see Judaism simply as a matter of ancestry and not as a spiritual religion. This survey reflects that most non-Orthodox Jews today affiliate with Jewish institutions only out of a sense of responsibility to previous generations, or to make sure their kids have a Jewish home in the future, or because they have an affinity for the culture they grew up in, and maybe some of the customs that go along with it. But the study showed that only 19% of Jews felt that Jewish law had any role in their life. We can say that 42% did say that having a good sense of humor was essential to being Jewish, which is why I'm such a great rabbi. There's no shortage of data to tell us what we already know. 200 years of freedom in America has been welcoming to the Jew. But how has it been for Judaism overall? Where are we today as a Jewish community in a time and place when our freedom is unquestioned and unhindered? Today there is no question that the Jewish landscape around the country is changing. Jews across the U.S. place Jewish institutions at a much lower priority in their lives. They and their kids have many other options and activities going on, and every rabbi and Jewish educator in the country wonders, how can Hebrew school possibly compete with soccer and basketball, gymnastics and violin, so many other pursuits that compete for our children's time? Synagogues are closing or merging with other synagogues just to pay their bills. JCCs are struggling. Federations are seeing their campaigns decrease, and the relationship between Israel and American Jews is increasingly strained. Somewhere along the way, the message of Judaism, the heritage of our traditions, and our commitment to thinking and acting Jewishly has become diluted. Too many of us are not familiar with the wisdom of the Torah, are not taking time to learn it and bring its message into our lives, and have traded in our spiritual bonds for cultural ones. There is a formula at play that cannot be denied. When the message of Judaism is diluted and doesn't speak to you, you place a lack of priority of Judaism in your life. When a critical mass of Jews deprioritize Judaism, Jewish institutions suffer, Jewish communities shrink, synagogues and JCCs close, and national movements weaken financially and emotionally. Among Jews who care deeply about Jewish survival, older generations begin to wonder where they went wrong, and younger generations wonder if there will be a viable future. When thinking about these troubling issues, there's one verse in the Torah that has always given me solace and provided me encouragement. It may be my favorite verse in the whole Torah. It's Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 7, which states, "Not because you are the mightiest of nations were you chosen, for Israel is the smallest of peoples." We were never meant to be a large nation. And I don't lament that the world Jewish population does not compete with the numbers of adherents to other faiths. We're not a proselytizing people. But I think that every Jewish leader and every thoughtful Jew should be concerned with the survival of the Jewish people and recognize that at any given time, there are existential threats to our existence. Last year, when I was on a rabbinic mission to Israel, one of my colleagues on that trip made a statement to the press, and it was actually picked up and repeated by the Prime Minister of Israel. The comment was, any Jew who is not concerned about the survival of the Jewish people will not survive as a Jew. It's a very profound concept, and one that I've been thinking about for a long time. When I was a rabbi in Charlotte, North Carolina, at the beginning of my career, I used to have lunch as often as possible with one woman who was a survivor of Auschwitz. She not only survived, but she came to America and got a PhD in Holocaust studies. She was an expert in the Holocaust in every possible way, and she was always willing to tell me about what happened to her during the war. One day I asked her if she was ever concerned in the camps that she was witnessing the destruction of Judaism. She told me that in Auschwitz you don't have time to think about such things. All you think about is surviving one day to the next. I had and still have immeasurable respect for her. She's a real hero of our people. And today she's very much concerned about the survival of the Jewish people. But sometime after that, I heard a different view. I was watching an Oprah Winfrey special on TV in which Elie Wiesel was giving Oprah a tour of the grounds of the Auschwitz-Birkenau death camp. He recounted for her his harrowing experiences there as they walked through the camp. And at one point he turned to her and said, "When I was here, I used to wonder if the Jewish people could possibly survive this destruction." That was a moment when I realized what a special thinker Wiesel was. And when I realized that Jewish survival was something that should be on our minds all the time. In the Pew Report, to the astonishment of many in the Jewish world, one of the top reasons as to why being Jewish is important was memory of the Holocaust. Certainly it's vital that we never forget the Holocaust, as the Torah commands. Do not forget what Amalek did to you. But the memory of persecution is not the totality of the values that guide our daily lives. Judaism is the sum total experience of every facet of life. It's a system that guides our actions, binds us to one another, maintains our culture, and aids us as a people to work together and make this world a better place. Unfortunately, in this time and place, in this land of opportunity, freedom and prosperity, we have let slip the majesty of a tradition for which proper utilization requires understanding, for which real benefit requires commitment, and true fulfillment only comes from sustained education and participation. In other words, if we see dilution of Judaism's message on our watch, it's not because the message has faded. It's not because that message is not valuable. It's not because the mission is not just. It's because our participation, our education, our commitment, and our understanding probably aren't what they should be. And keen observers of the American Jewish landscape will be justified in wondering if the future in Judaism can really be robust. A couple of years ago, I got into the habit, probably some of you have gotten into this habit as well, of reading biographies of famous rabbis from the 18th and 19th centuries. I was fascinated by how they rose to prominence through a combination of rabbinic genius and brilliant community building. To become a great rabbi in Europe in those days, it was pretty simple. Be a Talmud genius, get invited to lead a congregation that is struggling, and build it up to something special. What I saw in common in each of these rabbis' stories was that in every case, they brought inspiration to a community that had somehow lost it. They brought Torah to congregations that had forsaken it. They taught their communities that every individual has something to offer the greater community. And they helped their people find their spiritual calling. They showed their people that a life of Judaism leads to a life of meaning. It leads to growing and successful congregations, and it brings spirit to those who have gotten too mired in the temporal. We don't have a great 18th century rabbi here at Beth Am. We do have 4 contemporary ones, and 2 canners, and lots of great educators, and lay leaders eager to fulfill the mission of continuing the trailblazing vision of those who came before us in this place. We have members who might not know how to seek it or find it, but who want to endow their days with meaning. And they can, with authentic Jewish experiences here in our community, with our congregation. We have a school that trumpets these values and students who are hearing this message. This is what we seek to do at Beth Am. This is why we are growing. This is where we are headed. It is true that unlike many synagogues and day schools around the country, We are bucking the trend. We are adding to our numbers, and it is significant. Soon, with your help, we'll have a completed campus ready to meet the needs of a thriving Jewish community for today and for tomorrow. But we will also have a campus that will, in addition to learning and praying together, will be designed to promote community bonding and the strengthening of the bonds that unite us. Betham is already our home away from home. Betham must be our home away from home. And it will be enhanced in a myriad of ways, specifically aimed at increasing our bonds to our faith, to our traditions, and of course, to each other. We are not building for self-aggrandizement or self-indulgence. On the contrary, we're building to preserve Judaism in our neck of the woods. We're building because we too are concerned about the survival of the Jewish people. We're building because our message and our mission of providing a home for every Jew to find his or her path towards Jewish expression and memberhood in an authentic and value-driven community is resonating, and we are growing because of it. We are building to make a better home for you, for your fellow Jews of South Dade, for all of us to stand up and say that on our watch, Judaism will not be diluted, it will flourish. In our day, Judaism will not wane, it will be enriched, it will be invested in, and it will be committed to. In our backyard, Jews will not cower or hide. Judaism will be celebrated, it will be cherished, it will be proudly displayed as the moral compass that binds us together and proudly leads us into the future. Our doors will continue to be turnstiles of Jews of every age, coming and going at a feverish pace to learn and study Torah, to be with the Jewish community, to soak in the blessings and the gifts of our heritage. Our programs will continue to enrich our lives, but with a renewed commitment by each of us to reject dilution and seek fulfillment. We will declare, not just by our words, but by our actions, that our Jewish pride flows proudly like a river. And it is here on this campus and with these people that our community celebrates and cherishes our tradition together. And as we achieve our goals, one by one, will we assuredly proclaim that as far as we are concerned, Judaism in America is not faltering. It is not disappearing. Instead, we will say to all who will listen in a loud and clear voice, Judaism is on the rise, and we are leading the way. Ken Yehi Ratzon. May this be God's will. Amen.